Alright, so I'm still having this rough idle problem. So once the engine is warming up to temperature and in closed loop, starts idling rough. It almost sounds like a miss, but it's not quite a miss. I also have a problem when you first snap the throttle on takeoff, of real poor performance. And the other thing I've started to really notice is extended cranking time on start after it's been sitting for a decent amount of time, like a couple hours. So I tried to check the fuel injectors to see if they were leaking a long time ago, and my test was to take all the plugs out, let them get good and dry overnight, disconnect all the electrical connections from the fuel injectors, turn that on, crank it, and hold a piece of paper towel over each cylinder to see if any fuel came out. And I didn't seem to get any fuel. But I thought maybe I had a vacuum leak, but it was actually this hose that comes over here for the crankcase ventilation, which is kind of weird. It comes off of this all the way down, back over. That was disconnected, where it would go into this air breather. And so, with that, when I was spraying the carb clean down here, some of it was getting sucked in where that PVC hose would normally go, and so that was causing the issue. I also thought maybe this charcoal canister vacuum port down here was bad because it didn't have any vacuum. It actually goes straight through to the throttle blade, and when the blades are closed, it actually sits above the throttle blades, so there's not much vacuum, and then as they open, it allows some vacuum to come through there. So it's fine. So I thought maybe some carbon or something got through the purge solenoid, maybe in there, plugged some stuff up, but I think that's fine. There's no fuel coming through the fuel diaphragm at all. So I'd like to test the fuel pressure on this, but there's no Schrader valve. I'd have to try to unhook it and get something hooked in there. It's just not going to be real easy to do. But I took my stethoscope out and I listened to each injector very carefully with it running, and they're all clicking and they all sound relatively healthy, but I can tell you that this one right here, it's just probably cylinder number 3. I don't know which side number 1 starts from, but this one right here sounded just a little different. It had a little softer of a click to it than the other 3. My thought is that even though I did that first test and I didn't think I had a leaky injector, I think I got one. Maybe it's not leaky all the time. It's only leaky like when you click it and it doesn't close fast enough. So my thought is that's making the fuel level rich. So right now the fuel trims now too, I didn't notice the fuel trims before, but I have to admit I was using my clunky laptop USB connector thing. So when I hooked the Altel up and really got to looking good, and I know more about fuel trims now than I did back then, the fuel trims are really high negative numbers. So, no, not really high, but 10 to 12 on average. If I take my short and long term, put them together, it's probably about close to 12. If I open the throttle up and bring the RPMs up, then it starts to come back towards 0, and maybe plus or negative 2 or 3, which is pretty normal. As soon as it comes back to the throttle being closed, goes to idle, it starts idling rough, and then my fuel trims go real negative again. So my theory here is that we've got one bad injector that's putting out too much fuel. And that's telling the computer to lean it out. And so it leans it out, and it does it across all 4 injectors though, to try to get it to an acceptable level. I still smell it running rich because there's still raw unburnt fuel coming out of that one cylinder because it's putting out too much. The reason I'm getting that initial performance hit is because when I step on it, all these other 3 cylinders, you know, they're running lean as crap. And it takes a minute for this short-term fuel temps to recover and start putting out a normal amount of fuel. Because after you're in it for a few seconds, it starts to pick up speed and run normal again. So where this hose was disconnected, that's not a vacuum leak like it would be typically on a MAF sensor vehicle. This has no MAF sensor. So it has an intake air temperature and the MAP sensor and the throttle position sensor. And of course the upstream O2 sensor is how it determines how much fuel it needs to be giving. MAP sensor hangs right around 4.9 to 5.1 at idle, which is pretty normal. It reads right at 14.7. I'm almost right at sea level here, or no, I'm like at 980 feet above sea level, which is pretty close to, you know, should be right around 14.7 for atmospheric pressure. So I think the MAP sensor's fine. I can't find any other evidence of vacuum leaks. I have taken the idle air temperature sensor off before and cleaned that all out real good and verified that it works, and it does. Throttle position sensor, I tested that with my analog meter. It's fine. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and pull this, you know, ignition cover off again. Get the plugs out of it. I'm going to look at the plugs and see if this one especially, or any one of them, looks different than the others. I would expect that it might not, because when you're going down the highway it runs fine and it has mostly highway miles on it. So it would only be the short times that it's sitting at idle that would be running rich. But we'll see if maybe it's a little blacker than the others and they look a little leaner. But the other thing I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and do a compression test on each cylinder. Make sure we got good compression, the valve's closed tight, there's no ring problems, anything like that. And then I'm going to pull the fuel rail off and I'm going to hook the injectors up to it, take the electrical connections loose, and then I'm going to see if they leak at all. If they don't leak, then I'm going to go ahead and hook the electrical connections back up to them, and then they'll have positive voltage. And then I'll take the test light, I'll back probe the ground side of the circuit that goes back to the computer, take the test light, put that to ground, and open that injector a couple times and click it, and see if it closes tight right away, or if it drips a little bit after it closes, or it takes a long time to close. And I'll do that on each of them to determine if I got a leaky injector, which is, from all the symptoms I'm seeing, seems like it's about the only reason that this thing is getting more fuel than it thinks it should to have those negative fuel trims. When I can't explain it, you know, a bad O2 sensor might cause that, but it wouldn't smell like it was running rich. So it is actually something's running rich, because I can smell it in the exhaust. So that's my theory. As much YouTube auto diagnostics as I've watched, that's what I've come up with. So I'm going to test that theory, see if my hypothesis is correct. I don't know if that's a theory or hypothesis. I should have paid more attention in middle school science. But I'll see what I can figure out. Alright, I got the plugs pulled out and laid in order. This one looks a little lean. It's pretty white. This one looks like it's not been running lean at all. And this one was hard to get out. There was a lot of carbon in these threads. I had to keep working it back and forth. All the other 3 came out really well. This one might have a little richness, but not much. I mean, there's some white on this in the insulator. This one's running lean, which most plugs run lean these days compared to what we were used to seeing back in the carburetor days. But this plug has more carbon on it than the rest, and that comes from that same fuel injector that sounds a little funny. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and unplug the fuel injectors and do a compression test. Alright, so here we go with well, the cylinder that's closest to the transmission, I'm not sure if that's number 1 or number 4. It doesn't say on the ignition coil cover. But let's see what the compression is like on that guy. Well, I'm trying to see pounds. Okay, so 150, 60, 70, 80, 92. So 190 psi roughly. So we'll try the next one. Up here where I can see. This is the one with the fuel injector I'm suspecting that sounded a little different. Where's the key? Well, that one's about 185. Acceptable. Go ahead and move this again. That one's a little lower than the first one was, but by about 5 pounds. Not within spec. Come on, get in there. Alright. I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see it or not, but I'm just going to do it. Uh-oh. Maybe 70 pounds. Not even 100. Let me make sure I got this hooked up right. Just to make sure this is in there. She's seated down good. Alright, let's try it one more time. You can even tell by the way it's cranking there's not as much pressure on that cylinder. Oh, crud buckets. Well, let me try the other one just for kicks. Okay, here's the last cylinder. That one's good. That one's 170, so it's a little low, but it's not that bad. Oh, I should have bled that off first, huh? But the this one right here, just number 2 or 3, depending on which way it goes. Now it's time to do a leak down test. So what I'm going to do, my hose in here, put this glove on. And then tape it down a little. And we'll see if it inflates at some point here. To see when we're on, oh, there we're on that compression stroke on that cylinder. Okay. So that's good. So now, go ahead and just feel for one that's at top dead center here. You should see that screwdriver start to come up. Now it's going back down. Okay, right there's top dead center. Now I'll take my glove back off. Put this back in. Now I'll take my leak down tester that I made based off of old school Funk's design. This will be its first official use. And I believe that hooks to here. Okay. Now turn that all the way, the regulator all the way down. Now I'll start to turn this up. So I'm getting about 20 pounds here. And I'm putting out about 60 over here. That's a pretty significant loss. Now I need to figure out where it's coming from. I don't feel anything coming out the throttle body, but I hear air somewhere. I got lucky. No, that was the hose. No, coming out the crankcase. Yep, I feel it on this PVC hose. Okay, that would indicate rings. Go ahead and turn this down. Yeah, I didn't hear anything coming from the exhaust, nothing coming out the intake, but it's coming out this PVC hose. And I can hear it under the oil cap a little. It's a crankcase. Oh, it's the bottom end. So what I'm going to do, squirt a little oil down in this cylinder, run another compression test on it, and see if that compression comes up all of a sudden. Alright, I'm just going to put a little bit of oil down here in this cylinder. I'll crank it over just a hair by hand. I'm going to work it in here a little. maybe. There we go. Alright. Put the right hose back in. Let's look at this hose. Here's the right hose. Alright, let's see if the compression comes up past 70 now on a wet test. Let's see what we got. Yeah, so the compression went ahead and came up on a wet test to about 110. That's at 120. So 100, it was nothing dry. Put some oil down in that cylinder. 110. I got blow by in the crankcase. It's a ring. Son of a biscuit, it's a ring. Man, first the PT Cruiser blowing ahead. That thing needs an engine. I don't know what I'm gonna do yet. I'll probably pop an engine in it. You know, I'm half tempted for 80,000 miles to pop that thing out on an engine stand, hone it, and throw a set of rings in it, and pop it back together and run it. I'll be honest. I think so. I lost an oil pan on that car once a long time ago. And on the highway, going 70, chunk of steel flew off a semi, took out the oil pan. I got it pulled over and shut down pretty darn quick, within 30 seconds. But it may have gotten starved for oil. And that's, you know, if the cylinder's fine. If it's just a cracked ring and it didn't score the cylinder up. But if the cylinder's bad, then, you know, you got to machine that. By the time you put all that machine work and parts into that engine, I might as well find a good used engine out of a junkyard and put in it. You really wouldn't think, like, this started out as it's running a little wrench and it's misfiring, and then I did the timing chain and I didn't need to. That wasn't it. And I really thought, oh, it's probably a fuel injector. Well, my theory was correct. There's one cylinder that's not burning fuel correctly. It's because it's got no compression. And of course, as it gets hot, that compression just gets worse. So that's why it seems a little better when it's cold, and as soon as it warms up, it's running like crap. Shows you that something that seems as innocent as a little misfire can end up being a major engine problem. So if any of you car guys out there see anything wrong with my diagnosis path here, I think I've done everything I'm supposed to do. Compression test, a wet compression test, even though I did that after the leak down test. But I wanted to do that afterwards because I didn't want to seal it up and then not have a faulty leak down test. So I went and did that dry too. And it's definitely got oil coming, got air coming out of the crankcase. I mean, in a significant amount, not just a little. You know, it might be normal to have a little blow by, but it's pretty significant. Like, put your thumb over it, it builds up pressure, kind of significant. Like, I'm sure it's a ring. I was hoping it might be a bent valve or something. It would just be a head. That's fixable. But that probably means a new engine. Alright, we'll clean up. It's getting dark. I'll talk to y'all later. This is Tom, Frugal Prepper.